In the summer of 1775, as the flames of revolution flickered across the 13th colonies, the air in Massachusetts was thick with a mixture of hope and dread. Towns and farmlands were alive with fervor, yet beneath this patriotic zeal lay fear, a fear that a loyalist or a spy could unravel everything the patriots fought for. In the heart of Concord, a quaint village framed by rolling hills and bursting fields, stood the Whittaker House, a sturdy colonial structure whose reputation gracefully bobbed between admiration and whispering suspicion. The Whittaker family was well respected, known for their robust hospitality and grand gatherings that would put even the most lavish of celebrations to shame. William Whittaker, the head of the household, was a local craftsman who shaped the community through labor and trade. His resolute gaze was fixed upon independence, while his wife Miriam maintained the home with an iron will beneath a soft exterior. They were the kind of couple one aspired to be, a symbolism of unity and national pride. But the cellar, a place seldom mentioned, held secrets far darker than the promise of liberty. Shuttered from the world, relegated to cobwebs and echoes, it became an unsettling underbelly to the proud structure above. When guests lingered over ale in candlelit rooms, laughter danced along the wooden beams, but outside of that jovial mirth, a silence weighed heavily on the cellar's stone walls. It wasn't uncommon for villagers to sense an undercurrent flowing through the community, rumors of clandestine meetings whispered among farmers and artisans. Late into the night, men clad in coats of brown and blue would slip into the house, bartering secrets over low flames. Each visit worth the risk, each exchange laced with danger. One night, as the wind howled and rattled the shutters, a figure cloaked in darkness slipped into the Whittaker house. The murmur of voices rose as male and female figures squared their shoulders with burdens too grave for public scrutiny. William, resolute in his newfound commitment, began to outline plans that would alter the trajectory of his family and the community. As the meeting grew tense, a shiver climbed the spines of the men as they whispered of loyalists and spies, their fear transforming into determination. And then there was young Samuel, their teenager, who would not know of peace. He often eavesdropped, rubbing his sleepy eyes or feigning rest as he peeked through the heavy oak door. Gazing down into the shadows, visions of bravery mingled with uncertainty washed over him, casting a pall of impending dread. One small moment caught him as a glimpse of a figure, perhaps a spy or mole, the very essence of betrayal looming just beyond the scale of his perception. He could feel the wind outside, howling like the wrath of men seeking freedom. Yet what freedom would it be, a freedom built upon the lifeblood of another? As he exited into the night, he could not shake the gnawing tension, a premonition of the horrifying decisions that might one day shadow their lives. Over the ensuing weeks, the Whittaker house transformed. Where gatherings had once fostered joy now echoed somber whispers. The cellar, now replete with cobbled floors smeared in secrets, became a makeshift interrogation chamber, a stark contrast to the upper stories where laughter once reigned. Each crack in the stone marked a resistance against enemies who lurked, each board creaked beneath the weight of turmoil. Men were captured, suspected spies caught in the act and brought to this secret domain. The air thickened with the tension of looming consequences. To betray the new cause, to align oneself with the king across the sea, became the ultimate risk. Just as the very edges of freedom began to sharpen, the danger of losing it haunted their every exchange. Samuel found himself swept into this tide of dread and uncertainty, hands trembling as he listened, now a witness rather than a shadow. One fateful evening, a man, a suspected loyalist named Thomas, was seized near the fields outside of Concord. He arrived bound, his wild eyes echoing a mixture of desperation and betrayal. William stood tall, a figure of authority masked with uncertainty. "You will speak or you will face consequences," he declared, his voice reverberating against the cold stone walls. Miriam hovered nearby, her hands clasped tightly as she watched the exchange unfold. Samuel felt both fear and sick fascination. He had never seen the weight of power so vividly come to life, and it was suffocating. "Where are the loyalist camps?" William pressed, marching closer to Thomas, who swayed under the intensity of the interrogation. The fear broke like glass, shattering the air around them as Samuel listened, feeling the pulse of betrayal radiate. Thomas, on his knees, muttered broken phrases, revealing scant details that seemed fabricated with shaky breath. "Treachery begets treachery," echoed Miriam softly, an undercurrent of sorrow binding them. As Thomas hesitated, stubbornness coiling like an adder, William's hand snapped, tightening around the loyalist's collar. The calculated desperation veering toward violence sent chills through Samuel, who imagined not just his father's wrath but the potential loss of innocent life. The weight of their actions settled upon them, the fear of losing what they were fighting for intertwined with the instinct to protect their own. This was a precarious dance where morality frayed in the shadows, blurring lines between justice and savagery. And yet, in the depths of that hushed night mirroring tumultuous souls, Samuel felt an unsettling revelation sprout within. They weren't just combatants for liberty, they were becoming something darker, laid bare through actions that congealed around blood. As days stretched on, the Whittaker house became a crucible of conflicting loyalties, where silence ensnared the unspoken horrors of betrayal. William remained unwavering, suffocated by a steadfast commitment to the cause, but Miriam felt the cold grasp of altering convictions. Each interaction with Thomas deepened the divide, dredging resentment beneath the facade of patriotism. With every encounter, Samuel witnessed the transformation, a spiral into disarray, a descent toward moral erosion. He stood outside the cellar one fateful night, breath held in hesitation, listening to the muffled voices creeping through the air. The cellar's shadows felt heavy and foreboding, while the light of the fireplace captured their world's fragility. "I'm offering you a chance," William's voice cut through the darkness, tempered with a feverish edge. "If you tell us the truth, we might reconsider your fate." Outside, the crickets chirped a mournful tune, but within the cellar the tension reached a boiling point. "You think I will sell out my people? I won't give you names. I'll take my chances with the crown," Thomas spat back, his eyes wild, embers of desperation igniting fury. And Samuel, planted firmly at the threshold, felt a pang of sympathy for the man who sought to protect his own. The walls began to close in on him like a vice, constricting his heart and mind. Could Thomas rightfully be seen as a traitor when his own loyalty remained anchored beneath layers of fear? In a moment of desperation, William made a choice that displaced him from the camp of man and motivated him to cross into the darkened alignment of retribution. The cellar turned, morphing into a prison, a place where shadows danced on the edges of life. Samuel's breath paused as he felt the shift in energy, where freedom was born in blood, and the dread of losing everything they fought for accumulated like a weight in his chest. As night swelled around them, the last flickers of candlelight danced in vibrato, revealing the ugly truth. Their fight for liberty had birthed the kind of violence that may consume them whole. And underneath it all lay the shocking realization that in pursuit of justice, innocent blood could flow, becoming entwined in the very revolution they sought to uphold. The echo of footsteps along cobblestones intertwined with whispered tensions as the autumnal trees surrendered their leaves to the chill of winter. War hung over Concord, thick and palpable, and the impending descent into chaos left its imprint on the Whittaker home. The cellar no longer merely served as a chamber for secrets, but morphed into a dark testament of what power could transform individuals into malefactors. As winter approached, word began to travel through the Patriot networks. A loyalist informant had betrayed their plans, leading to the arrest of several local revolutionaries. The realization struck hard, a bitter twist of fate. Samuel, enveloped by anxiety, sensed the pressure closing in around him like a cage. He could not compartmentalize nor disassociate from the moral weight stacked against his family. The night of reckoning arrived when the whispers materialized into action. William summoned what constituents he could gather at the Whittaker house. News of impending traitors sweeping through loyalty lines awakened both fear and resentment. Shadows stretched as lanterns flickered against their white walls. By now, Thomas had become a specter in their household, tormented by the discovery of his names etched alongside possible betrayal. "You must understand," William began, addressing the group, his voice wavering between calculated control and suppressive terror. "We are on the precipice of losing everything. I propose we execute the traitor before he brings more harm to our cause." The air shrieked with fear, the idea echoed back with a chilling clarity that spilled into each listener's heart. A resolve seemed to fill the cellar, touched with moral ambiguity, a terrifying liberation for the spark of violence that lay dormant within. Samuel stood rigid, observing the faces illuminated by the waning light, masked by indecision while his stomach churned wildly. A quick vote was held amidst the rising chaos. The girl from the neighbor's house was as pale as the winter moon. Soon afterward, Miriam's quiet voice broke the cacophony. "How can we do this?" she implored, her words soft yet slicing through the atmosphere. "Can we condemn a man merely for seeking his own safety?" But her words fell as stones upon the turbulent waters. Her husband, stalwart in his conviction, brushed aside compassion with stubborn resolve, staining the fabric of who they once were. As the hours blurred into one another, finally the decision was made, rooted deep in fear and loyalty. A choice that spun from the fervor of revolution now wound in blood-soaked tar. The cellar would transform once more, not just a witness but a participant in the violence they had sought to quell. Under the flickering candlelight, they descended into the darkness with heavy hearts, each step reverberating with the promise of liberty stained with betrayal. The weight of the choice thudded beneath their feet, ready to follow them into eternity, a haunting reminder of how power can bind even the most righteous to the unhallowed. And so on that December night in 1775, Thomas met his fate beneath the cellar's cold stones, a reluctant martyr to war consumed by conflict fading away, swallowed by the very principles they sought to assert. The price of freedom had never been so steep, and within that house in Concord, the legacy of liberty bore the scars of forgot humanity. In the depths of their actions, an understanding settled. Where violence begets violence, even a patriot's heart can grow dark. In the months to come, the Winter Soldier campaign would rally the townsfolk, emboldened by their fight for independence. Yet beneath that fervor lay the chilling truth, the silhouettes of innocence lost, traces of faith blurring as liberty shone through a veil of moral uncertainty. The Whitakers would move forward, but forever changed, entwined within the historical landscape defined by the harrowing journey toward freedom. As winter deepened, Concord embodied a disquiet that settled into the very marrow of its inhabitants. The Whitaker house, once a symbol of unity, now loomed as a darkened monument over undeniable choices made and lives altered. Ghostly breaths of air slipped through cracks in the walls, echoing the torment of decisions past. Each morning broke with fresh frost heavy on the ground, a reminder that the cold spread further than the physical realm. William, now a man transformed, wore the weight of his actions like a second coat. He strode through crowded streets with a resolute exterior, yet deep within his being, shadows dwelled, unseen demons of guilt clawing at the edges of his purpose. The fervor of the cause fueled him, yet whispers of Thomas haunted him, spiraling through his thoughts like frosted wind. In those early months of 1776, Samuel grappled with both admiration and fear of his father, a fractured idol who stood as protector yet also as executioner. He shifted through the motions of disgruntled youth, yet every glance into his father's eyes revealed a flickering candle's flame, raw and vulnerable. The scenes he had witnessed in the cellar replayed nightly, a carousel of distant screams echoing within. Miriam carried another burden, increasingly detached from her husband's fervent zeal. The radiance she once exuded dulled, replaced by reflective sadness that clouded her spirit. Every morning she descended the creaky stairs to prepare for the day with a heart heavy, knowing that darkness resided not only in the chamber but seeped into their lives, transforming them. She urged William to consider mercy, imploring that liberty could not be claimed through the blood of their fellow man. Yet each appeal folded beneath the mantle of resolve that clutched him like iron shackles. On one particularly frigid night, as the wind howled outside, the door swung open to reveal a breathless neighbor, clothed in desperation. "The Loyalists are organizing, they're plotting against us," shouted James, his eyes wide, pulsing with urgency, the same eyes that had once shone with reverence for the Whitakers. The meeting descended into chaos, swirling fears igniting anew, collective anxieties thrumming beneath the surface, simmering tensions threatening to boil over. William stood once again at the center, commanding attention, his voice elevating above the storm. "We must act," he urged, unwilling to lose momentum. His desperate determination opened wounds already raw. Days evaporated into nights as strategies formulated. Meetings grew more clandestine, alliances strengthened. Yet the more they planned, the more fractured the community became. Suspicions raged, neighbor turned against neighbor. The delicate sense of brotherhood fractured as those little monsters joined the fray, trepidation creeping, cloaked in stones and whispers. As they perceived imminent danger, Samuel felt the tension strangle those innocent fragments of childhood. He could not escape the reality of their actions. Weapons forged to protect the dreams of a free nation had worn them down like a relentless tide. The shadows danced in the corners of his consciousness, whispering promises of devastation. Miriam watched her son grapple with an understanding too profound for such a young heart to bear. She pulled him close, wrapping her arms around him in a desperate embrace. "You are our light, Samuel, this darkness cannot consume you." Her voice was soft, yet it trembled, and Samuel felt the gravity of her words press heavily upon him. One evening, Samuel decided to venture out into the bitter night. The moon hung low, casting ethereal light upon the crags and valleys. He inhaled the cold air, knowing it was tainted with the scent of conflict and destruction. He found himself standing before the very place that had witnessed so much. The cellar door loomed like a gaping wound. Each creak of the wood sent strings of dread through him, a reminder of choices made. Inside, he stumbled across the remnants of their decisions. Shackles hung loose from the wall, whispers of betrayal lingering in the air like smoke. On a table lay an unfinished letter addressed to Thomas's family, words of deep regret spilling forth from a quill. "If only I could take back," reciting forever on parchment, muted by the passage of time. It felt as though the house itself spoke out in agony. And it occurred to him then they had sought to protect their names, their lives, their ambitions. But what had they sacrificed? What lives had they extinguished in their pursuit of a heroic legacy? A profound sense of unease settled upon his heart, and Samuel turned to leave, vowing to carve a path guided by hope rather than burdened by the weight of their choices. As spring unfurled its delicate fingers over the thawing ground, the whispers of revolution transformed into tangible scents of gunpowder and bloodshed. The tensions between loyalists and patriots escalated, and as news of battles rippled through the colony, the weight of the Whittaker legacy only grew heavier. The house, once an emblem of unity, now stood witness to splintering relationships and a society poised at the brink of collapse. Concord was caught in a quagmire of conflicting loyalties, echoed through each laden encounter. William, still resolute, felt surge strength at the inkling of an impending battle. "We fight for independence," he proclaimed, eyes flashing with fervor, rallying the townspeople beneath the banner of duty. But beneath the roar, seeds of doubt festered, fueled by whispers of former friendships twisted into rivalry. Miriam's spirit had dimmed with each passing day. The weight of her own actions and the decisions made within those darkened walls chipped away at her resolve. The death of Thomas haunted her dreams, twisting through her consciousness as chilling vistas of guilt revealed themselves with an unapologetic brutality. One noon, a note slipped beneath their door marked an undeniable change. A directive outlining the names of local suspected loyalists and the imminent threat they allegedly posed to the community. William gathered with fervent allies, smoldering tension gathering like a deceptively calm surface over pending storm waters. Samuel lingered beneath the eave, feeling sickened by the inevitable march toward violence, questioning whether liberty could ever justify bloodshed. "Tomorrow we strike," William declared, eyes aglow with fervor as the men around him nodded affirmatively. The echo of that haunting simplicity fractured through Samuel. "But father," he hesitated, breathless with fear, "what if they're not who we think?" "Silence," William snapped, and the room turned cold, his voice reverberating like a gunshot. "You know nothing of the stakes at hand." Silence enveloped Samuel, and a suffocating chasm grew massive between them. He retreated from the room, heart racing, torn between the desire to stand strong and the urge to protect that flickering ember of humanity which begged him not to yield to this moral abyss. As the sun dipped low the following day, the Whittaker household bristled with unease. Men donned their coats and armed themselves with weapons that had forged from their collective fears. William, commanding their spirits, sought to paint the picture of heroism while casting a dark shadow over any doubts. At that pivotal moment, Samuel's resolve hardened. He could no longer stand by, could not allow chaos to seep further into his home and heart. Seizing the opportunity, he slipped from the noise, moving like a wraith into the depths of the woods. Resolute, he would seek a way not through violence but protest, the means of a young man's hope stirring against the winds of war. Hours passed like eternity beneath the canopy of branches as Samuel ran through the trees, the world swirling around him. Eventually, he found them, a group of locals, patriots gathering, determined to speak against the tide of violence. "We must not kill," he implored, breathless and earnest, amid rumbling voices that turned to stare. "Can we honor our cause with bloodshed when we seek freedom? Let us rise above." A hush fell, then a nervous murmur. One voice stood strong, the gathering silent, allowing Samuel to speak, the conviction washing over him like spring rain. "Liberty demands courage, yes, but also compassion. We cannot build our legacies on the pall of others' sacrifices." The voices then began to lift each other up, murmurs of agreement echoed against the trees, washing over him like a renewing tide. The sense of hope began to take root. United, they forged a collective resistance to the frenetic drumbeat of war. By the time Samuel returned home, a swell of renewed purpose filled his senses. He entered the Whittaker house, steeling himself against expectations and dogma. He would stand before his father, a moment of reckoning. And upon the threshold stood William, ready for the march, fervor in his eyes, until halted by the presence of his son, a specter of resolve. "Father, enough, we can be the change, we must not yield to our shadows." Fueled by generational determination, both father and son stood at an impasse, the dawn of recognition dawning between them as the world outside beckoned, blurred by the uncertain flames of revolution. Together they faced the duality of choices made, wrapped not solely in fear but framed by hope, uncertain but awakened. The march of time urged them, a war that sought freedom at a cost neither fully comprehended, and within that moment they understood, a single flame could unite against oppression without additional shadows cast in vengeance. In choosing compassion, they bore the essence of liberty itself. the strength to stand resilient against the looming darkness hypnotically intertwined. What triumphs and scars would yet unfold as the revolution charged forth remained uncertain, but even in the uncertain twilight, they sought the very heart of what it meant to be free. As April dawned, the air crackled with anticipation. The conflict that had simmered beneath the surface now threatened to boil over, and the once familiar landscape of Concord shifted under the weight of impending violence. Within the Whittaker house, a fragile truce emerged between William and Samuel, nourished by their shared desire to redefine liberty. Yet the echoes of battle lingered, resonating like a drumbeat, relentless and unwavering. On a damp, blood-soaked day, news arrived. A skirmish had erupted in Lexington. Whispers slipped through the streets like wildfire as citizens gathered to hear the grim reports. The British had clashed with local militias and blood had been drawn, Patriot blood spilled upon the dusty roads of the colonies. William stood at the threshold, his fists balled tightly. The air felt electric with the weight of his impending decisions, confusion and dread swirling around him. "We must assemble," he bellowed, calling forth familiar faces, the men of Concord, emboldened by a cause that felt more urgent than ever before. "We stand for our rights, we will not cower." Miriam, ascending from the shadowy alcove of the kitchen, observed the raging storm in her husband's eyes. "William, think, this is not just a rebellion, it's an escalation of violence," she exclaimed, stepping forward, hands trembling slightly. "We must show them we are better than this." But William, a man caught in the tempest of loyalty and rage, turned away. "What choice do we have? They've drawn first blood, we will retaliate or we will be slaves." Samuel felt the tug of loyalty and morality pulling at him like frayed rope. "Father, there are other ways. We can rally the people not for violence but for unity," he urged, striving to carve a new path, a thread of responsibility woven into their shared history. Their house became a microcosm of the greater unrest. Outside, neighbors gathered, some drumming fists against chests, others silently pleading for restraint. Samuel could see the divide deepening amongst their own ranks, love among friends turned to suspicion and bitterness. Yet it seemed no words could penetrate the fever of excitement and revenge stirring in men's hearts. That night, as the house bore witness to hushed voices and the fervor of escalating tempers, Samuel drifted into his thoughts. He pondered the true costs of this war, the lives that would be lost if men surged against each other, nurtured by revenge rather than the ideal of freedom. The cellar weighed in his mind, stark reminders of decisions layered in blood standing between them and their hopes. With resolve bolstered by a sense of collective duty, Samuel decided to take action. On strangely still streets where conflict soon swirled, he gathered the voices of reason about him. One by one they came, farmers, artisans, and workers who sought not bloodshed but peace. "We march," he urged, "to the town square to stand against the violence that looms." Those who gathered listened to the young man, invigorated by hope. "We are not just warriors, we are builders of a new world, one rooted in dialogue, not discord," he implored, holding the gaze of the crowd in earnest conviction. As word spread, the group flourished, men and women uniting beneath the banner of peace, a swelling entity standing against chaos. Samuel felt a spark ignite within him, illuminating the potholed path toward reconciliation. The following morning, the townspeople gathered in the center of Concord and news swirled like spring breezes. Brutality lined the air, the scent of battle emerging on the horizon. Samuel took to the makeshift dais, standing tall as he faced an uncertain crowd. "To fight is human, to act in anger is instinctual, yet we must choose compassion. The world waits for us to lead with courage that transcends the weaponry of hatred. Only then can we honor those lost before us." And before him, faces twisted with uncertainty began to soften, the message poignantly hanging in the air as unity flickered like the dawn of a new day. Words became ripples across the assembly, caressing the fears that weighed so heavily upon their hearts. Yet not all embraced the movement. William stood resolute, an immovable specter among familiar faces. The powerful allure of vengeance still pulsed beneath his skin, issuing a challenge he could barely concede to. "Your naivete dooms us all," he shouted, directed toward Samuel, whose pleas danced upon fraying strings. "We are warriors, we cannot stand idle, an enemy approaches." But Samuel persisted, his voice surging against the rising tide of chaos. "Let us disarm our hearts before we seek the weapons of war." The two men stood at an impasse, father against son, ideology crashing upon reluctance, challenge tightening between them like a noose. The day unfolded slowly, mired in tension. Those who gathered with hopeful hearts mingled uncertainly with angered patriots who saw any pause at the brink of violence as weakness. As dusk descended, uncertainty cloaked Concord. Relentless echoes of clashing ideals reverberated through the townsfolk, their lives poised upon the vertex of war. It became a moment that would shape both families and friendships. William glimpsed his son amidst the tumult, challenging, questioning, but the flames of zeal spurred on by camaraderie blinded him to what he could not accept. And so, as the sun dipped low, its last rays cast shadows upon the townspeople, the lines of battle blurred into shades of gray. A choice loomed unspoken. Would they march toward war or find a glimmer of hope even in the darkest hours? The weight of their collective decision settled as they stood poised upon the edge of history, knowing the path forward would transcend bloodshed or unite them. As night crept into the streets of Concord, the sounds of revolution echoed stealthily on the horizon, urgent drums of war churned with the somber prayers of peace. In the Whittaker household, the atmosphere thickened with an unyielding mix of fear and resolve. Gone were the days of joy and laughter. The tension lay heavy on every conversation, each word imbued with consequence. The town square trembled as men approached, with blackened hearts clutching their muskets, fueled by a desire for vengeance. With their faces set in stubborn determination, they exuded a restless urgency, a force that threatened to engulf the very fabric of the community. Samuel's heart raced, torn between the loyalty toward his father and compassion for their shared humanity. Just at twilight, under the last flickering rays of sunlight, the rally culminated with a choice hanging suspended in the air. Spirited speech intermixed with fervent declarations, each band of patriots gathering under the banner of righteousness, eager for confrontation. "We march!" was the call that rang out, a decisive yet chilling mantra uniting them under the promise of violent retribution. William, standing with the impassioned crowd, felt a current of exhilaration flow through him, a raw energy driven by the descent of years past, the sense of injustice ringing within his chest. Not far away, Samuel watched as the remnants of his father's humanity flickered beneath the darkened ambitions. Their world, once held by fragile ideals, now crumbled into an escalating dance toward inevitable destruction. "Samuel, join us, this is our time," William called, beckoning his son forward. The thrumming energy danced like wildfire across the assembled men, voices rising against the chilling night, banners swaying with primal fervor. But beneath that veneer of glory was an open wound, one Samuel refused to coalesce with. This is not the answer, we cannot become what we seek to fight against," he shouted in defiance, knowing he was risking not only an argument but their very relationship. How could he, bound in the legacy of a soldier's lineage, detangle himself from the fears that gripped his father? The realization moved through him, coursing like icy water. His heart sought a new course outside of conflict. Tension snapped across the crowd, gnarled memories cutting deep. "You stand against us?" William asked, voice rising sharp as a blade. "We fight for our lives, or do you prefer servitude?" Heart racing and breath shallow, Samuel spoke from a place of desperation. "Freedom does not thrive in blood, we cannot conquer through violence. We must believe in a better way." Tears threatened to spill as he yearned to reach his father's heart, praying for peace. And there, in the silence that followed, the damning truth took hold. Tension spilled forth not only between father and son, but the entire gathering trembled upon the precipice. With every moment, the divide stretched further, some witnessing the heroism in slaughter while others found resonance in Samuel's vision of reconciliation. Hope hung palpably in the weighty air, flickering like the last remaining candle before darkness swept in mercilessly. But with dogged persistence, Samuel took a stand, rallying the other voices yearning for dignity among the tumult. "Together we can build, together we can create a new path. We stand not for war but for unity." The calls of suspense began to rise amongst some members of the crowd, seeds of doubt unfurling within the stubborn hearts. Yet just as hope fluttered like a wounded bird, a sound reverberated across the tension. The sharp crack of musket fire sent everyone into a frenzy. Fear gripped them, terror gripped William, who turned to Samuel with a wild look. "They're pushing forward, we must respond." Chaos erupted as confusion rippled through the assembly, fierce emotions swirling in unpredictable currents. The spirit of rebellion sparked into blinding fury, arms of loyalty wrapped dangerously in bloodlust, and in that split second, ignorance rippled across the crowd, transforming hope into violence. "Father," Samuel reached out, desperation clawing at his heart, seeking to bridge the distance created by divergences they could not escape. "We can still choose another path." But the seeds of conflict had been sown, and bloodshed loomed as the bitter winds swept across Concord, spiraling into an inferno that neither of them could foresee. where choices would shatter ideals and reshape legacies. As everything unraveled around them, the choice was made, a divergence that could fracture them forever. And in the heart of the storm, the Whittaker home remained silent, haunted by the echoes of human desire, love for freedom tempered by the bitter reality that sometimes one's fight may claim more than they could ever imagine. The Clash and Concord erupted into chaos as gunfire rang through the air, the sharp noise tearing apart the fabric of the community like an unforgiving storm. Men who had once stood united now found themselves swept away by a tide of adrenaline and fear. The once vibrant ideals of liberty and justice crumbled into shouts of rage and cries of terror, morphing the landscape into a battleground littered with shattered friendships and disrupted lives. William, propelled by a fierce sense of loyalty, charged alongside his fellow patriots, driven by an instinct for survival steeped in tension. The weight of his choices settled heavily on him, echoing louder than the sound of muskets firing. But amidst the roar of the crowd, the sight of Samuel pressed against the sidelines pierced through the fervor, a haunting reminder of everything that was at stake. "Stop!" Samuel's voice arose, carried like a fragile feather against winds of war. He fought through the gathering dark, attempting to drown out the sounds of violence, straining to reach his father. "This is not the way." Yet the surge of bloodlust flooded the air as soldiers bristled with purpose, shielded by the allure of revenge. With each pull of the trigger, Samuel felt the oppressive reality envelop him, the horror of what they were becoming unfurling before his eyes. Families, friends, and neighbors became faceless enemies in the crush of conflict. In that moment, clarity pierced William's heart. Beneath the fury ran an undercurrent of realization. His son was right. Violence would not breed freedom, it would only deepen the scars of a nation divided. But to voice this truth now, in the midst of chaos, felt like standing against a brewing tide. Samuel pressed forward, each heartbeat echoing the urgent need to bridge the chasm growing between them. "We can still make peace, we can fight for our future without destroying each other." His gaze bore witness to the frantic energy surrounding them, to the reality of what lay ahead, fewer choices and endless consequences. Suddenly, a shot rang out too close. A young man faltered, clutching at his chest as he collapsed onto the ground. Screams erupted, drowned in confusion and horror. Samuel's heart sank deeply into his stomach. This was the cost of their action, the visage of what they had chosen. Laughter and camaraderie vanished like fleeting shadows. "Was this what freedom looks like?" Samuel shouted, desperation rising like bile. "Is this the legacy we want to leave?" The immediate chaos drifted momentarily into a depth of silence, a fleeting breath where seeds of doubt nestled among the war drum's deafening rhythm. And something stirred in William. Memories flooded his mind, the laughter of shared meals, the warmth of family gatherings. What had they sacrificed? With resolve, William lowered his rifle, his heart pounding as he turned back to Samuel. "You're right," he said, voice trembling but unwavering. "This cannot define us." But the tide of men around him surged forward, their glinting weapons and blood-soaked beliefs overwhelming the moment. William's choice hung suspended in the air, each second stretched into an eternity. "Miriam, Samuel!" he cried, turning to seek his wife, to find the family they had forged before war twisted their realities. But around him the frenzy continued, voices rising like shadows against the sun. The battlefield became a dark tableau of loss, shouting faces morphing into ghosts of those they once cherished. The air thickened with the grim scent of smoke as chaos marched forward, swallowing them whole. And as midnight encroached upon the aftermath, something stirred deep within Samuel. He could not stand idly by while his father was swept into the clutches of conflict. He stepped forward, ready to shout, to remind them of their humanity, to honor those who had already fallen. But just as he opened his mouth to speak, the gunfire rose anew, cutting through the evening like a storm's roar. The world spiraled around him, camaraderie turned to hostility, and in that surge, time blurred, uncertain and wrought with despair. As he witnessed the chaos thrumming all around, visions of bloodshed morphed into a heartbreaking clarity. Lives tangled like roots beneath the earth would carry the weight of his family's choices long after the echoes of battle faded. In the chaos, William locked eyes with Samuel one last time before surrendering to the maelstrom, drawn into the conflict that threatened to consume everything they had ever known. As the dust of war settled, a new understanding swept through those who fought, mingled with the ghosts of decisions made. And so, in the heart of rebellion, the Whittaker family stood fragmented. Family ties, once ties of comfort and love, now threatened to dissolve into the shadows of forgotten ideals. Outside those hallowed walls, the cries of discontent mingled with the final breath of the fallen, forever marking the history etched into their lives. But even in the darkest corners of conflict, the flicker of hope lingered. The world might still remember the faces behind the violence, the ideals behind the confrontations, and the warmth of liberty forged through a relentless pursuit of peace, grasping desperately at the tattered threads of humanity. As the dawn broke upon the horizon, the battle raged on. What remained was a reminder. The pursuit of freedom is never singular. It passes through many hands, hearts, and choices, reaching towards a distinct light that even war cannot extinguish. In this struggle, the Whittaker family became but one thread in the greater tapestry, united by a desire for liberty, yet forever scarred by the choices that lay beneath their feet.